New this morning, the New York Times just published polls from 6 key battleground states, the states that could very well decide the 2020 election. Joining us now to break down these numbers, CNN Politics senior writer and analyst Harriet. And Harry, I have to say there's a huge wow factor to looking at these polls. Now, I know it should be surprising if you've been looking at the national polls. Still, I can't remember seeing margins this big in these key swing states.
No, I mean, I don't really either, to be perfectly honest with you. And this is really the first clear indication that we have that the national lead that Joe Biden has taken is really getting into those key swing states. So let's take a look at them, right? The 6 key swing states, the closest states that Donald Trump won in 2016. What do we see right now? We see Joe Biden opening up a wide lead, the smallest of which is in Florida, where he's only up 6 points. But look at the key 3 Midwestern states that Donald Trump won, those Great Lake battlegrounds. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, double-digit leads for Joe Biden in all of them. And keep in mind, back in 2016, these were all states that Trump won by an average of about 2 points. Those 3 key Midwestern Great Lakes states, he won by a little bit less than a point. And right now, he's up by double digits in all those key Great Lakes states. And he's up by 6, 7, and 9 in Florida, Arizona, and in North Carolina. These, simply put, John, are huge, huge leads. This is a huge story.
Yeah, it's a blowout. I mean, it's a blowout when you look at it like this today. And I know it's just today, but you look at Arizona, you look at North Carolina, which are traditionally more red-ish states. To see the margins there, +7 and +9, those are big. Now, Harry, one of the things you're going to hear, no doubt, as the Trump campaign wakes up is, oh, it's just one poll. This doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and truth be told, that will be a BS line. Take a look at Wisconsin, right, where we've actually had 3 polls taken since late May into June. These are after the anti-racist protests started. And what we see from Fox News, New York Times, Siena, and Marquette University Law School poll, all top-notch polls, is we see the average there has Biden up by 10. And what's so important here is compare that to the prior poll, right? For all 3 of these pollsters, what we see is significant movement towards Biden. The prior polls, on average, only had Biden up by 4 points. We're seeing more than a doubling of Biden's advantage in Wisconsin. Of course, Wisconsin was the keyest of the swing states in 2016. It was what we call the tipping point state. The median electoral college vote was in those states. So the fact that Wisconsin has moved all the way into Biden's column like this, that is very significant news and suggests he has a true electoral college advantage at this point.
And it's the movement that matters here, Harry. We always say this, polls are just a snapshot in time. No one is saying the election is today. We know there are still 4 months to go, but what this does show, and the consistency over the polls, including the CNN national poll, the New York Times poll, the Fox poll, is you're seeing clear movement here. And we don't have a slide for this, but it's broad-based movement, too, among different voting groups, racially, demographically, age-wise, education-wise.
That's exactly right. I mean, here are a few things I'll just note. You know, Wisconsin, right, which I really wanted to get into, is a state that has a lot of white working class voters, that is, white voters without a college degree. So the fact that Wisconsin's moving so much is an indication that Biden is really making inroads into that group. He, in fact, in the national polls has been improving by about 10 points among that group compared to where he was just a few months ago, and especially compared to Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And whites with a college degree as well. That, I think, is the big story here, is that white voters, who I think Donald Trump is trying to get after with this law and order politics, right, they are not buying it at this point. They are shifting in to Joe Biden's column, and that's the big story. Biden is winning where there are a lot of white folks, as well as winning in those more diverse states in the Sun Belt. And so this, to me, is just a very broad-based movement towards Joe Biden. It's a real indication that those national polls are starting to get down in those swing states, and we're seeing real movement in Joe Biden's direction.
The silent majority that the president thinks exists might want something else than he thinks it does. Talk to me about the impact that this has on the electoral map vis-a-vis what we saw in 2016.
Yeah, I think this is so key. Remember, of course, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but she did not win in the Electoral College. So what I essentially did was I looked at the polling average, right, in all of the different states and said, if the poll average was exactly what the result would be, what would be the Electoral College result? And what we see right now is a Joe Biden blowout, right? 368 electoral votes to Donald Trump's just 170. Biden is basically winning in all the key swing states that matter. And that 368 is over an 100 electoral vote improvement compared In fact, it's over an 120 vote electoral improvement compared to where Hillary Clinton was just 4 years ago. So it's very clear that the Electoral College won't save Donald Trump if the polls right now are an indication of where we're going to be come November.
And one other thing I'll note, we're out of time here, is that Joe Biden is consistently at or higher than 50% in polls, which is somewhere where Hillary Clinton was not. You can see right there. She was at 42%. She was ahead, but he's 9 points higher than she was 4 years ago. Harry Enton, it's great to have you on this morning. Thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Shalom, my friend. Like my beard a little bit? I think it looks pretty decent.
Keep working. Keep working.
Thank you.
Let's discuss with Alex Burns. He's national political correspondent from the New York Times. Also, Laura Brown-Lopez, national political reporter with Politico. Let me start with you, Alex. If you have a problem, you know you have a problem, you can fix it. You have time, 131 days to the election. But the president's problem, when you look deep into these numbers, is he has many problems. He's down among white voters, he's down among seniors, and he's down among men. And so he has many problems to try to fix all at once.
Well, that's right, John. There's very little good news for the president in any of this polling. And if you are an embattled incumbent, even someone who's not terribly popular, where you would want to be at this point is at least having a very, very solid political base of your own, and then 4 months left in the campaign to make your case to people who aren't necessarily inclined at the start to be for you. Where President Trump is right now is he has lost even some people who were inclined to be for him a year ago. You're looking at, again, not a majority, but important clusters of white voters, white men, senior citizens. These are constituencies that Republicans need. One way to think about those swing state polls, John, that you just read off, Trump could gain 8 points across the map in every swing state. And he would flip some of them back into his corner, but he would still lose the election overall because that's how far down he is in those Midwestern states and North Carolina.
Right, that's what makes it so hard. He has so much to do. He has time. There's 4 months, but he has so much to do, both state by state and constituency by constituency. And Laura Brown-Lopez, let's look a little bit more closely at this white voter struggle for the president, because it is all the more critical to him because we know he struggles among Latinos and African Americans. He cannot count on building his support among those groups. You see Florida. Trump's up 16 among white voters in Florida, but he beat Hillary Clinton by more. He's up 16 in North Carolina. Again, he beat Hillary Clinton by more. He's only up 5 in Arizona. And then you move on to the Midwest battlegrounds. Michigan, Trump +3, Biden +5 among white voters in Pennsylvania, Biden +8 among white voters in Wisconsin. If those numbers don't change and don't change significantly, this president can't count on getting help from the rest of the electorate, if you will.
That's right, John. Trump's base is very small to begin with, and it is, as you mentioned, predominantly white and conservatives. So if he isn't able to win back some of those voters that are now shifting towards Biden, he could potentially have a lot of trouble come November. The impact of that is also on the Senate, which we see in that poll, where Biden is helping a number of the Democratic candidates in these battleground states. Trump is trying, as you mentioned, to win at the margins some black voters and some Latino voters. But again, the vast majority of them are going to vote for Biden per the polls that we've seen so far. One of the striking numbers also from that poll that I noticed was that Biden is ahead of Trump by roughly about 17 points in terms of registered voters who didn't vote in the 2016 election. And so, again, that is good news for Biden because he is also trying to win back some of the voters that voted for Obama and sat out in 2016 and didn't vote for Clinton.
Right, both campaigns trying to go after those voters who didn't come out last time. That is a number to keep watching. And Alex, there's no mistaking here that Republicans are nervous, not just because they'd like to keep a Republican in the White House, even though many Republican members of Congress and the Senate sometimes roll their eyes at this president, but they would like to keep their Senate majority. And if you look at the battleground polling, you go to Michigan, Gary Peters winning quite comfortably in his race right now. If you go to Arizona, Mark Kelly, the Democratic challenger, is ahead over the incumbent Senator Martha McSally. And North Carolina, it's very close, but your incumbent there is Tom Tillis, the Republican, who at the moment, you could call that a Democratic lead or a statistical dead heat. But the map does not look good for senators either. And we know there's very little ticket splitting in today's politics. So those Republicans are nervous the president is dragging them down.
That's right, John. Those Republicans knew that they were going to have tough races at the start of the cycle, but basically every Republican Senate candidate on the map, except for maybe Susan Collins in Maine, made the calculation to tie themselves pretty completely to the president and trust him to keep the presidential race close enough that they could pull through on ticket splitting. And as you see in North Carolina, that's possible for Thom Tillis. I don't know that it looks good for an incumbent senator to be under 40%, but then you move over to a place like Arizona, and there is just nowhere near the kind of ticket splitting going on to keep Martha McSally really close in that race. And, you know, doing callbacks with the voters who participated in this poll, doing some deeper interviews with them over the last few days, I have spoken to quite a few moderate and even somewhat conservative voters. You know, again, a small sliver of people who describe themselves as conservative, but in a presidential election, a small sliver of your own base defecting is a really big problem. And these people saying, you know, they're fed up with Trump and they're fed up with his party. They didn't like the impeachment trial. They don't like that when the president goes out and does things that they consider outrageous, that you hear silence from Senate Republicans or people covering for him.